Hi, everyone. Welcome to Distillery Sessions, the podcast by Distillery. My name is Peter Hoffer, and today I am joined by Rich Miles. Now, Rich is the CEO and co-founder of the Diversity Standards Collective, and I'm sure he has a lot of advice and stories when it comes to branding and diversity, so let's jump in. Welcome, Rich.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm embracing lockdown and life before and after it.
Yes, it is quite the adventure of recording these things from different parts of the home. So I guess to kick us off, can you tell us a bit more about yourself, Rich, and the Diversity Standards Collective?
Sure. So my background is that I was a creative director at an ad agency for a number of years. And at which point I started to reach out and work with an organization called Advertising, which I suppose a lot of people have heard a lot about, which is it was the first LGBT lobbying group for the advertising and marketing industry.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, I used to do predominantly their creative reviews every year, which was reviewing the LGBT ads that had come out that year with a panel of LGBT and allied industry bodies and people. And that thought process really led me to realize that there was a disconnect between the industry and people from diverse communities. And actually, bringing this group of LGBT people together made me realize there wasn't many LGBT people in the industry to reflect on content. So I set up the Diversity Standards Collective really to, one, increase the standards of diversity within the industry, but two, connect you with diverse voices from across the spectrum so that they can help counsel people through the process to make better and more authentic work, but also to consult with like internal and any external projects that they may have to make sure that they're getting it right and they're speaking to these communities appropriately.
Now, before we, I guess, delve further, diversity is quite a big, meaty term. So perhaps it'd be helpful if you, help us define what do you mean by diversity in this context of marketing and advertising.
Well, I think diversity has always been a word that obviously signifies difference. Mm-hmm. Different from the norm. And when you're looking at it from an advertising and marketing perspective, the norm is, straight, white males is probably the norm within advertising and marketing, yep. Internally and actually predominantly externally in our comms as well. So diversity for me, I mean, I list on our website, that we kind of deal with lots of different groups like LGBT, disabilities, people of color, religion, etc., etc. But realistically, we represent everybody. There's the diversity is including men and white men. Anybody who's misrepresented in comms is included. So for me, diversity is just the spectrum of everybody and the differences between everybody that build up communities.
Yeah, I was looking on your website and it has some really startling statistics when it comes to different groups and how they feel that they're misrepresented. So, for example, 72% of LGBTQI plus community feel that they're misrepresented. 61% of those with a disability feel that they're not represented correctly in in marketing and advertising. I mean, these are quite
they're large, big stats. Yeah. Interestingly, the LGBT one has gone up from 72 to 82%, and it's the same. Karmarama and Gay Times did the research, and in a year, it's gone up from 72 to 82% feel that their representation is tokenistic, which is interesting because what it implies is that as an industry, we are ploughing more work out, and more LGBT or more work featuring diverse people in it, but we're not getting it right. We're actually getting it more wrong, or there's more work to get wrong within this. And it is startling that all of, no community from, women to people with disabilities, etc., they're all above 50% of not happy with the way that they're represented. And I personally think that's because the work when it's created hasn't included those people from those communities in the process. So they're slightly misunderstanding how people like to be represented or the different cultures that are around.
Now, why do you think a brand should to be quite blunt, care about these, these statistics, or what different communities think if their bottom line is being met?
Well, I think that for years, people have reached out to mass market, and they always assume when it's mass market that these people are, 2.4 children, straight white families. And actually, most other communities have just built up a tolerance of watching ads that don't represent them and buying from that brand. Any brand, McDonald's, anything, there's always featured a family, in that process. And, as a gay guy, there was never really gay men in those ads that represented me, but it didn't mean I still bought from that product. But times are shifting, and people are much more relating to brands that they can see themselves in, that they can see their friends and families in. And actually, it's about, one, like staying on top of the pulse and staying with the times, but it's also about making money. Like, as a brand, if you only represent one part of your audience, you're only really going to get money from that part, that segment of audience. And if you add up all of the different diverse groups, as we've stated a little bit before, they are larger than your mass market in total. So actually, by putting people who are different from the norm into your comms, you're reaching out to a larger audience, which means more people are going to feel represented, more people are going to feel an association to your product, and they're going to buy from them, and you're going to make money. So I think that's an important thing to remember when we're talking about diversity, that it's not just moral, makes monetary sense as well.
Yes, no, it does make business sense. That's not just a sort of a nice to have cherry on top when it comes to, say, your marketing or branding activities. Now, I think, we mentioned earlier different communities who feel that they're perhaps not visible, not represented well. Are there other groups, other communities that perhaps are gaining more of a voice that perhaps they weren't being addressed before? So I'm just thinking of perhaps issues of mental health, or different visible or non-visible disability. Is that something that you've seen with your work and your research?
Yeah, I think the industry definitely goes in trends with diversity, because there is obviously a lot of different diverse segments to pick up and different diverse groups to represent. And we've very much seen advertising, everybody jump on board one community at a time and move around. So, for example, LGBT men or gay men were in a lot of adverts, and then that transitioned to, there was a year where we've seen recently a lot of trans people are in adverts. And then now, because of the BLM movement, we are seeing a lot more, and a massive increase in people of color, especially the Black community, being in adverts, which is, again, fantastic. But I think brands need to be aware of why they're doing these things, because this is when they miss the mark and it becomes tokenistic, because they are just throwing people in without any thought about the actual character or the narrative being appropriate for the person they've put in that ad. And when I talk to brands, I always say, like, before we decide on which diverse community you want to target, let's look at this strategically. Let's look at your audience, look at who's buying your product. Let's take a deeper dive into that audience. So you're not just handing your creative agency a brief that says millennials 16 to 25. You're saying, yes, millennials, but this segment of people are, we over-index on people of color, we over-index on people with disabilities. So let's make sure that the creative is rounded for hitting those different audiences. And then working from the beginning to say, right, what's appropriate, what kind of narrative should we tell in that, and making sure that we're not just placing a white straight narrative and then putting somebody from a different diverse group on top of that, which is why it misses the mark.
Yes, I mean, that sort of goes into my next sort of question of, when a brand comes to the Diversity Standards Collective and say, we'd like to, make sure we are reaching new communities, or making sure our messaging is, authentic. It sounds like there's a lot of work from your side of a few steps back of where the actual marketing takes place. So as you said, it's not just adding something to the finished product. It sounds like there's lots of, homework that needs to be done by the brand with your support.
Yeah, I mean, we get approached by brands at lots of different steps in the process. We always say that the earlier we can speak to you, the better, just to give you that guidance or that a nod to. So we are getting in touch with brands a lot of the time at script and treatment stage, to make sure that we're putting those scripts and that treatment in front of a council of people from that community, to make sure that before they start spending any money on anything, that the narrative's appropriate, the choice of casting is appropriate, the choice of locations are appropriate for that choice of casting, etc., so that they can really go into the process without fear. It is not necessarily a lot of work. It's just making sure that people are in touch with the communities they're trying to speak to at the earliest stage, so that they can just, a nod, yeah, that's absolutely fine, or no, that's glaringly obvious. You need to be careful of this segment of your creative or your strategy that you're doing. So it's just making sure really that everyone's aware from the offset.
Okay. Is there, I guess, like a typical, opening conversation that happens when you're approached by a brand, or does it, differ depending on the different communities that they're reaching, or the different sort of stages of their marketing that they're on?
Do you know what? It is the same conversation every time, and it's really funny because people are a bit nervous about how they approach it, but realistically, everyone's in the same boat, which is normally, "Hi, Rich, we're trying to feature this X type of people or this community, but we don't know how. We don't know if we're getting it right. We're disagreeing within our agency what's appropriate and what's not. Can you help us out?" Is the main conversation, regardless of what community they're doing. It's always that they've got to a point where they've realised that they need to reach out for some guidance. Normally, people are a bit nervous to ask about it, but I'm like, you should be really proud of the fact that you haven't just gone ahead blindly and haven't just thought, "Oh, we know," because that's been the problem previously, that people have thought they knew about people and about communities, but actually they don't. So it is the same conversation. It's normally like, what should we do? How should we approach this? And then it's me guiding them about either putting a strategy of councils in place, or going online and checking their work at that point, or etc. There's a lot of different ways, but it's normally the very same conversation at the start, which is, we're doing this and we don't know if it's right or not.
Okay. Now, you've talked a bit about the conversations you have, that is facing the brand, but can you talk us more through about the conversations you have with different diverse communities whose opinions and experiences, would help, validate that type of marketing that you're working with?
Yeah, so the Diversity Standards Collective, the collective itself is actually diverse communities from across the country that we've onboarded onto our system. So we have like thousands of different intersectional views that we're able to access. And it's really like two parts of the business. There's the consultation part. There's also the kind of research facility that we house. And it's really about engaging them and just listening. Like, it's not really a two-way conversation with me and people from other communities. It's more me listening and learning and putting people in touch, and listening and learning again from those communities. And actually, for years, people haven't had their voice, or they haven't been listened to. So people are quite excited and energized when they're given a platform to say how they feel something should be, or how they feel they should be represented, and it not be an argument. Because all too much diversity and equality for some reason is an argument, rather than just like listen, learn.
No, that's a very valid point. And I guess that goes into my next question of, that different communities don't have a single viewpoint or a single voice. So how those conversations evolve when you're speaking with, for example, one, say, disability community, but each member has his or her different experiences. How do you ensure that their experiences individually are taken into account, but sort of distill that into something understandable for the brand to really take a hold of?
Okay, so when we're doing it, sorry, let me start again. When we sorry, let me back up one.
No problem.
I think all too often we have looked internally with our agencies for a point of view from the community, and we normally reach out to, say, the only gay guy in the office, like I was for a long time, or the only black person in the office, or the only disabled person. We ask their view, and we put a lot of pressure on them, like they're speaking for the entire community, which actually is unfair on them, because if it does go wrong or it doesn't get great feedback, then all blame is on that person. Mm-hmm. And as you rightly say, because of intersectionality and different life experiences, the opinions are different. There is some core values that are the same that drive through every community, but experiences are different, and how people like to be reflected are different. So we would never go for just one opinion. We'd always go for a number. So for example, if you check through our online system, it's normally 30 people plus. So you will show a script or show a strategy or show a piece of content to 30 people from that community. And we normally go quite granular into them. So if you are showing a gay, disabled black man, then we will speak to gay, disabled black men to have their opinions, so that you're getting it from those intersectionalities, and you're getting the opinions from the right lived experience that you want. Because a gay white man's experience is completely different from a gay black man's experience, so you have to take that into account. And then when we check on our councils, we have at least 3 people from our council members normally who are professionals, so they're industry people but from communities, who will give professional and lived experience, kind of their advice on both sides. But normally, to be honest, there is a lot of agreement when it comes to how people like to be perceived. So when we do these councils, we do them separately. We don't do them in a group necessarily. So you're not getting kind of one loud voice pushing the others. You normally do one session, then another session, then another session, and you take out those key points from people. So when we have a number of them, we normally go over a guide of them. As long as a high percentage, like 70% plus, agree with that thing, then we kind of give you the go ahead. If not, then we would give guidance on which parts need to be altered or which parts need to be changed, because there's a disagreement with them.
Yeah, no, I think that's where the richness comes out, that it's not just putting all the pressure, as you say, on one person's shoulders to represent that community, but getting a wide range of experiences and opinions and advice, which ultimately makes for a richer storytelling.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I guess my next question is, are there certain examples that you're quite proud of, that brands who have worked with the Diversity Standards Collective, that you look back on and are quite quite happy with the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the companies I can't name, actually, because we work with them, it's in the early stages and they're checking their work, and a lot of people aren't necessarily ready to be proud of the fact that they are speaking to diversity. I think there's a mindset change that needs to go on with some brands, because I feel that people should be proud of the fact that they are stepping outside of their agencies, finding these voices, finding these opinions, and checking their work. But some people are a bit nervous, like they feel actually the fact that they need that help is actually wrong, actually a bit wrong. But no, I mean, we've worked with, I'm just thinking the ones that I can name. We were at Microsoft last year, which was great. We did a talk to their EMEA staff about how best to include marginalized voices within all of their communications. And we're working with some big media agencies and some other big brands to check their Christmas campaigns that are coming out this year. Yep. But it's really, my favorite thing realistically is that every time I do a council with a different group of people, it unearths something that I had no idea about, or that they didn't know about, and we can have a good conversation about, it's always apparent why these things are important, because normally the things that the agency and sometimes myself we'll look at a piece of content that comes through, and I'll be like, well, this might be a problem, this might be a problem, this might be a problem. You go to that community and none of those things are a problem, but other things are a problem that you never thought about. And that's always the interesting thing is, I'm a strong believer that you can't speak for another community if you're not part of it, realistically, because everything that we've learned about other communities from, say, the media or advertising is normally an outdated or overused stereotype or a lie, because they've been made by people who are looking from an outsider's point of view on a community, So, hearing people's voices and saying, oh, we never listened to that Christmas song. We don't listen to Elton John when we were younger. That's kind of something that maybe, Western white people listen to, but we didn't listen to that at Christmas. So, even those little things that people, it doesn't dawn on people. It's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. I guess to put a different spin on that question, are there brands that you've seen out in public that you feel are trailblazers when it comes to positive representation or diversity in their marketing and branding?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I openly speak about brands that I think haven't done so well and brands that have done well, because I think we need to have open, honest conversations.
Mhm.
Advertising have just done an awards, and which I was helped plan the kind of judging of it. And Renault won for their campaign they did recently, featuring two LGBT women, and they did a great. It was a narrative that was true to the community. As did Starbucks. I know everyone's talking about it, but they had an authentic ad featuring a trans person that related to a product truth, which was about writing your name on a cup. And I think that's when we have a really good blend of authenticity in ads, is when it's the narrative from that community relates to your brand properly, and it's not just shoehorned in. So and McCain's, I've always been a big fan of McCain's, because they've kind of always showed lots of different diversity. They put a lovely little narrative about on top. But yeah, and Carling did an ad featuring a trans woman a few years ago, which I think was for a beer brand or a lager brand, amazing to feature a community, especially when the perception would be that their audience may not be as accepting as others. I think that sort of thing is really trailblazing. So Carling did a great job. And then there's other ones that slightly I see that I have disagreements with friends, whether that's good or bad or not. And that's, again, different experiences. There's ones that are glaringly obvious that aren't necessarily great, but they normally get, big conversations within the industry. But again, I think brands are starting to become more aware about what they need to do. And I'll always teach about like stereotypes. If you're about to jump into creating a piece of content that features a community, my advice always is try to tell a different story than what you've seen before. If it's about, LGBT people, you don't need to tell the story about people coming out or the transition of a trans person. I mean, they're important stories, but they're overused stories. And sometimes that can be at detriment. Like, we're not just about coming out. We're not just about our transitions. We have everyday lives. We live the same as you, etc., etc. Maltesers did that great advert where they featured a woman with disability talking about dating in a really normal way. So look into different narratives, look into different stories, and make people remember your ad, because they're seeing something they've never seen, and it's something that's for the first time, which is always interesting to consumers.
Yeah, I think as you've shared all these examples of Starbucks and Carlings and Renault, it seems that they're all based on the authenticity of what the central truth is for the audience, but also how it relates to the brand itself. It doesn't feel shoehorned in or sort of diversity by checkbox, so to speak.
Yeah, and that happens in ads. Like we saw there was a British Airways ad last year, I think, and it went through the review panel for advertising. And when you see those ads where you kind of flick around different communities, but they're not mentioned, I think we have to be aware of highlighting, all representation in my view is great. So if I see two men holding hands in an advert, I feel as a gay man, oh, that's great, because I know that other people are seeing that. It's normalizing the process. But the more we just see a flick of a gay couple or a lesbian couple in an ad, the more we kind of feel like, well, actually, it'd be good if you told a narrative from their point of view, rather than just flash them up. That's when it starts to become to feel tick box, because you're just saying, here's a gay person, here's a black person, here's a disabled person, but you never really get any deeper than that. And I think people are calling out, especially Gen Z and people who are more socially aware, they want to hear the stories from other people. So it's really important that we don't just have flashes of imagery of different groups. We actually decide that actually we're going to tell this story. We're going to tell what it's like to be, a single gay dad bringing up a child, or a black disabled woman dating, or those sort of things are important to tell the stories and not just showcase their faces.
Yes, I think that sort of feeds into my next question of the term tokenism, because I think we've seen examples where a brand will put a rainbow logo when it comes to Gay Pride Month, and as soon as it hits midnight for the 1st of July, goes back to their standard logo. So how does, a brand sort of not fall into that trap of being seen as tokenistic when it comes to different communities? Is it that, that constant sort of deeper narrative that you've mentioned with those previous examples, or are there other steps that brands should be made aware of to not treat the different diverse communities as just a feel good or a token in their marketing activities?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like I kind of feel like Pride is sort of like, imagine if you had a friend and you only ever speak to them on their birthday. You ignore them the whole year, and then on their birthday, you're like, oh yeah, by the way, happy birthday. And then you don't speak to them again for another year. And if that was a friendship, you kind of get to a point where you're a bit like, I don't really know why I'm friends with this person. They don't really care. They don't really take any. They don't really ask me how I am for the rest of the year. It's just on my birthday because they feel like they have to. And I think that's kind of a nice metaphor for what Pride is like, is that people aren't just gay for 1 week of a year. And when it gets to Pride Week or Black History Month, or, it is good that brands start thinking about that community at that point, but you've got to think, what are you actually doing for the rest of the year for that community? And are you even doing anything? Like, you can't just get to that point in the year and put a rainbow flag on your logo, but you haven't taught your staff about inclusivity. You haven't potentially worked out how you can reach that audience with your brand. There's a lot of things that you should be doing. And I think by showing a rainbow flag, that needs to be a symbol that you've been supporting, or you've supported that community. And it's kind of like, again, it's a flag that you can hold with pride because you've done something and you've helped make that community or change it for the better. And you're not just putting it on to make you look like you like that community so that consumers will buy from you. It's a two-way street, I think, when it comes to supporting, and it's from both sides.
Now, I think we are, almost to the end of time, but I just wanted to ask, what is the, what are the big goals of the Diversity Standards Collective for the rest of 2020 and beyond?
Our goal for 2020, the joy of 2020, eh? The task of 2020 is to make sure all of the industry and wider industries are aware that help is out there, and that if they need help or they need guidance, it's okay to reach out. And even if people just want to find out if it's appropriate for their brand to do, reach out to the Diversity Standards Collective, and we can guide you on the strategic way that you can do it properly for your brand, etc., etc. So it's just for people to be aware that help is out there, because it hasn't been. But the long-term goal, I hope that we don't exist in 10 years. I hope that people are so connected and they are so aware that they need to hear their voices from different communities that they don't need me to introduce them, because they already have them within their agencies. They already have networks of diverse people. And the industry isn't looked at as being, older, straight and white anymore. It is inclusive. So hopefully, going bust would be great.
That is quite the worthy goal to aim for. Now, before I let you go, there's a few quick fire questions that I wanted to run by you. It's something that I've asked other guests of the Distillery podcast. So what is the last thing you recommended to a friend or family member? So this could be something like a TV show or a new recipe or a new band.
Oh God. I must have recommended something on the weekend. What did I recommend? You have to edit this long pause out. What did I recommend? Oh, I remember what I recommended. I recommended there was a drama with David Tennant called Des, which is about Dennis Nielsen. He was a mass murder of gay men back in, testing me on the dates there, but 10, 20 years ago. He was in North London, and I think he killed up to 20 men in a different way. I don't know what I'm saying there. Yeah, he killed up to 20 men. But David Tennant and ITV did a program called Des, which is based on the book by Brian Masters about Killing for Company. And it was David Tennant did an amazing job of showing this guy. But what I loved about it was there was nothing really about him being gay. Normally in those sort of programs, they highlight the fact that the person was gay as sort of an added credibility of why he was crazy. Do you know what I mean? It's always there was like, this is a gay murderer. And it was really nice to see the portrayal of the fact that it was just part of the narrative. Like, yes, he may have had sex with the corpses. I don't know if you want to put that in. But like, what I mean is they didn't use his gayness as an added reason to why he was a psychopath, basically, which was really nice. It was just in there. So I really liked the program because it was just about him being kind of mental and the murders. I probably haven't described it in the best way, but yeah. So
that's on ITV.
Yeah. I could and if you want. In a more cohesive.
Next question is, what are you a fan of that might surprise most people? So we've had things like, are you a fan of heavy metal or crocheting or things like that? So it's really interesting to sort of hear these things from these different guests on the podcast.
Well, I'm going through a phase of really enjoying Westlife's greatest hits at the moment. Not really sure why. I came back quite under the influence of alcohol, shall we say, the other day and listened to their greatest hits album, and I haven't been able to stop listening to Westlife for a while. But I don't know if that's going to be a surprising thing that I'm interested in.
Have you ever stopped listening to them? That would be I guess the next follow-up question.
No, I used to listen to them when I was 14. I used to tell my mates that it was absolutely fine that I liked Westlife and that people like different music, because obviously that was considered a bit like camp when we were younger to be able to listen to Westlife, but I owned it. I loved it. So yeah, Westlife at the moment. I'm just trying to think about what else. No, just like being locked in lockdown and buying lots of cushions and lots of like house things has been my new favorite thing.
That makes sense, since we're spending a lot more time living and working and breathing in our own homes.
Yes, exactly.
And final question. So if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
You can go onto my LinkedIn and find Rich Miles, or if you want to get in touch with us, just go to the www.dsc.org.uk, and there is a way to get in contact with me there, or just drop me an email, really. I mean, I'm just happy. I love a chat, as you can imagine. So feel free just to drop me an email, or and I can help you out. And even if people just want a bit of consultation, or just to know that they're, and they don't actually want to necessarily begin a project with us, I'm happy just to get on the end of the phone and help talk people through things if they just need that reassurance or anything like that. So just get in touch for any reason, even if you just want to chat.
Well, thanks, Rich, for joining us today on the Distillery Sessions podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, if you want to follow Distillery on our socials, we are @WeAreDistillery, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next episode soon. Thanks, everyone.